wow, that's the class I missed in art school. You know, what you learn formal things when you're in art school about painting and drawing, but my curriculum was based on the idea, I remember, of idea generation, but I really think that the description of your class specifically and what you guys are doing is something that I would have wished I would have had more of in art school, because it's what I do the most of when I make art now. And I think that when I came to this show idea, which was about 2 years ago, I've been doing landscape painting in Iowa already then since, well, I grew up in Iowa, in eastern Iowa, and I lived in DeWitt when I went to junior high and high school, and then I went to school at the University of Iowa, and then I fled Iowa and went to school in Washington, D.C., because I thought I needed something really big and glamorous and fabulous and not Iowa. But I didn't realize, you know, I could have gotten that education here. So I went off to Washington, D.C., and then eventually came back here and started doing landscape painting full-time as an artist in 1990. Excuse me. But for me, when I came back, I started doing really straight formal landscape painting. Like the two pieces that are on these walls behind you, they are part of a 4-season series, this one being spring and this one's fall. For me, landscape painting at the beginning of my, we'll call it my adventure in 1990, it was very much about the landscape in front of you. And it was about getting in the car and getting out and driving and just looking. But when I came to this show 2 years ago, it was more with the idea that I, as an artist, had evolved, and it wasn't just the formal presentation of looking at landscape, but it was really the investigating that I did to come up with the different ideas behind the work that made it more interesting for me and became more about what the work was as opposed to what you formally see in front of you. I'd like to talk about what you see on the wall over here, because it is about inspiration and source material. This is a preparatory study for a mural that is in the post office in my hometown and in DeWitt. And when I was a child, I would look at this mural that was done by our hometown painter, whose name was John Bloom, and he painted with Grant Wood, who did that fabulous little painting of the farmer with the pitchfork, right? With the Gothic house, with the house behind him in the Gothic window, and it's called American Gothic. Because of the shape of the window, it's called American Gothic. And it was painted in about 1932. And Grant Wood actually entered it into a show at Chicago Art Institute, which was at the time sort of the big biennale place where you would show, and he won third prize. And of course, then the painting goes on to be like the most parodied painting next to the Mona Lisa maybe in history. So I thought as a child, the fact that this painting was in my post office and it was made by this like local painter, I was like, oh, I'm gonna be a painter. I didn't know what being an artist was, but this painting itself just riveted me. I loved it. These are the things I really liked about it as a child. I liked going through here and seeing that, I know this right along here, there's like a pumpkin stuck in here. Oh, here it is. Here's the pumpkin. I like the dog. I like being able to even look at the structure of corn, and I thought, I can't believe this guy made a painting about a farmer. I mean, you know, and it was a WPA mural. It was a mural that was part of, FDR had started this program called Works Progress Administration. It was during the Depression, and so local painters were sent out to work, to create work. And it created this cultural legacy that obviously inspired me as a child. So this is the preparatory study for the painting. It looks just like that in DeWitt. And then this is the one over here is in the Tipton post office. So I was always looking at this painting. I mean, every week I probably went to the post office because it was the coolest building in my dreary little hometown. And I looked at this and thought, I'm going to someday paint. And then I went off to art school and never really thought much about the Iowa landscape again. And then I came back to Iowa in 1990, and for me, having lived away for a number of years, it looked different. It looked more interesting. It was more fascinating and more romantic than I remembered. So 2 years ago, I contacted Iowa State University, and they had several works in the collection already, and I said, I have an idea for a show. And I wasn't totally sure what the idea was, but it was, you know, I want to talk about the history of landscape my history as an artist, but the other history of people who went to school at Iowa State and how their lives and growing up in Iowa had changed how your life is today. And I wanted to make work about that. I wasn't exactly sure how, but it was sort of a general idea. And I, as an artist, when I was in art school, you had to go to the art library and look up everything in a book, and everything was very tiresome to look up, and ideas mostly came out of your head or things you read in magazines. But with obviously the introduction of the internet totally changed things for me on research. So now in the last few years, I'm able to, anytime I have an idea, you look up every idea, and then it creates 9 paintings. And so finding images now wasn't just driving down a country road and taking photographs and painting. It was about, why am I making this art? Why am I doing this? And the reason I started the idea of this show was I had just watched a documentary by Ken Burns. He makes those really great long ones that have the really good music. Are you familiar with these at all? He did the Civil War, jazz, Prohibition, baseball, and he did the Dust Bowl. And I thought, people had always told me, oh, you should have lived in the 30s and been poor, Ellen. You always seem to connect Grapes of Wrath. You know, you seem to have a connection to this time period. And even my lifestyle now even sort of has this bizarre kind of frugality to it that almost seems Depression era. Save every scrap of paper, you know, every plastic bag, that thing, never waste a drop of water. So this show, as time went on, you know, you start thinking, what is it about my history? What is it about my family's farming history? Why are we here? And it sent me on this sort of finding out even about my family homesteaded a farm that they still own in the 1840s. I didn't know anything about this about my family, but what I really liked is that I just had enough of an idea that sent me looking. And so I started finding out not only about my history and my family's history on the farm, but what I found out was that there were all these great people that had gone to school at Iowa State University that changed the course of history. And so some of the works in this show are specifically, and we're going to walk to those, and those works are specifically about those people, what they did, and I'll describe them when we come to those. But I want to talk about the work that we can see close around you, and then we'll get up and move to another gallery. Well, we might as well talk about this piece behind me. This work is called Mark Twain, Crimea, Twilight River. I love to think about names. Sometimes I think names are really interesting and descriptive. This one describes the piece in that it's about Twilight, and it's about Mark Twain to a small degree. Because I grew up on the eastern side of Iowa, the Mississippi was a big deal in my life, and my brother was a riverboat captain, and my grandfather on one side that was not a farmer helped build the lock and dam system up by Bellevue, and that was also a works progress administration project. So I really had this connection to the water, and thought, I'm going to do something about the river. So usually when I start, I always think I'm working in series. And series for me can mean multiple paintings like the Four Seasons, where I'm looking at one location over a year, but I'm making a series that might take you a year of looking to look at. This series is really looking at one location for one little bit of time, maybe 1 minute. But I keep going back to the same location every time to see how it changes for 1 minute at different times. The reason, and it's really specific even within the series as to why there are 12 paintings, and that I'll explain as to the connection of the name. This is the first one in the group. I'll tell you kind of the order that I make things in. This was the first one, and I really, really loved it. I really liked that painting, and I started thinking, I'm going to make 4 little paintings about the water. There was no title involved or anything. It was just, I'm going to make these 4 small paintings as preparatory studies eventually to make very large paintings, which is also part of my process. That I work on smaller things to work out colors and composition, and then if I find something really successful, then I take it and I move it into something larger. But this piece itself, rather than going from a small work and then making bigger pieces about it, I decided the series itself was really about these small works, because I was really starting just to make small works about the Twilight, and then I realized it is about the Twilight, and the reason that I chose the name Mark Twain, Crimea, Twilight River, is I'd taken a vacation as a child to Hannibal, Missouri, where Mark Twain had grown up, and I loved Mark Twain books, I loved the Mark Twain quotes, his sense of humor, but I really found that the name Mark Twain was part of the painting itself. Mark Twain is the pen name that Samuel Clemens used to write under. And then the phrase Mark Twain is a riverman's phrase for describing two things, the depth of water. It's either 12 feet or 2 fathoms of water. A fathom is 6 feet. So 12 feet can either mean to a riverman safe passage or hazardous waters. And I like the idea of that Mark Twain and the numerology of 12 was part of the painting itself, that there wouldn't be more paintings in this set. It would be I would show the 12 together because it connects to the name Mark Twain itself. And I like using those sort of almost poetic references. And I don't think of the name while I'm working. It was more like after I was into about painting number 9 that I'm like, this whole thing is sort of moving into a much bigger river idea than I thought it was going to be. And so then I started doing some research on Mark Twain and found the origin of his name, and did some reading about his life in the Nevada Territory, where they claimed they gave him the name Mark Twain because he was known for ordering 2 drinks at a time and having them paid on credit. And basically truncating the phrase, I'll mark me down for 2 drinks. So I like that whole story and finding out what it was. And eventually that whole story actually becomes a part of what the piece itself is. That doesn't happen in every work, but I like it when it does. While we're still sitting here, I just want to point to the other side of the museum, and you see the 10 small pieces that the light coming on the prairie. Again, it did not start. It started me knowing that I'm going to do a painting about. This one doesn't have research behind it, but it was really like, I'm up every day at 5 o'clock in the morning watching the sun rise, and I'm watching this, and I'm watching this, and I was always been a person that I like to sit alone in the car for a long time and really just sort of look. And I noticed that I was always getting up at sunrise and watching the sunrise long and slow, but I was never doing if you did one painting about the sunrise, it didn't really, for me, describe what it's like to be on the prairie and to feel the light come on the prairie and to feel how big it is and how it just envelops you. But multiple paintings explaining the way light moves did work for me. And so the series started as one painting, and then it's like, okay, that's not the sunrise. And then it gets to the second one, the third, and the fourth, and you're like, oh, I get what I'm doing. And then suddenly, like a lightning bolt, you're like, I'm making a series of paintings about how the light comes on the prairie. And so it starts almost, for me, backwards. I tend to move from almost a backwards way of coming to the idea that I want it to be in the end. So I like that series over there because there's some, experimentation in the plan of itself. When I was working on things like the 4 seasons, I absolutely know, and to a large degree, kind of what the paintings are going to look like, because I'm painting exactly what I see in front of me, extremely faithfully. Maybe not the colors in the sky, but the landscape itself. The light is definitely something that I've always, connected to, and that I can almost memorize, like taking a picture with my mind. And so those kind of pieces don't have that sort of unintended experimentation, we'll call it, where something is happening but you're not sure what's going to happen. And I find that for me as an artist, there's more joy when you find something that you're not intending to find. I like the experience of making the things that I was familiar with, like the 4 seasons, but it's the stuff that I'm not familiar with that I find is more exciting for me. So this show for me had a lot of opportunity to really dig deep and start thinking about where my farming family came from and why they were there. And so at this time now we're going to get up and we're going to start talking about some of the other works. I describe myself simultaneously as the most disciplined and the laziest artist possible. And I mean this way. I'm incredibly disciplined about the hours that I keep when I work, because only when you are really disciplined and you force yourself to sit down and work, a certain amount of hours. Did you really? Oh, well, this is good that I'm bringing this. I have no idea what I'm talking about for many minutes, but I think let's talk about my discipline and my laziness. So, I'm very lazy and I'm very disciplined. I have such a hard time sometimes getting to start to work that I honestly do this. I will write down how many minutes I work to force myself to get into a routine. You know what I mean? To get used to the rhythms of working. I sometimes will have to sit and say, we're going to work for 22 minutes, or I'll look at the clock and I'll say, no, you cannot get up and leave. Whatever your problems are, whatever problems you're having with the work is, You must sit and force yourself to work. So I'm so lazy, I have to force myself to do stuff by doing these little tricks. And I get up really super early in the morning, because I think I can get a lot more done by noon, and I get lazier as the day goes on. But I'm very committed to getting up and getting in there doing it. I never wait for inspiration to hit, because it never hits. It never works. It's turn on music. It's go through a routine. I find that for me, it's set up the routine. And I had a very specific routine because people have asked me several times today, how long did it take you to make all this work? And I started this about 2 years ago. So I really set up for myself to accomplish an entire museum show, a working schedule that I knew I could fulfill. If I fulfilled the hours, I would fulfill the commitment of work. So I got myself really used to, this is much easier to do in Arizona when it's warm, but I got up every morning and ran, like for 25 minutes. And then I would come back in and, you know, I don't wait for a lot. It's just sort of you're in your dirty clothes and I just plain start. I have things I'm a very organized artist too. Everything is very planned. Like when I started on this piece, I knew without a doubt I was going to do a very large work, and I wanted it to have to do with oak trees, not only because the state tree is the oak tree, and you can find oaks of the different species in all different counties, all the 99 counties in Iowa. But I really liked the idea that I had this memory of this painting that, again, a painting that had affected me was a 25-foot painting that Jackson Pollock had made in the early 50s for Peggy Guggenheim. And he did it while he was like drunk for 2 days because he had a year commitment to make this painting, and it's almost New Year's Eve and the painting's not done. And his wife, have you watched that movie, Pollock? You know, she removes the wall in the house, you know? Anyway, so I loved this painting called Stampede, and it was in the museum when I went to the University of Iowa, and I would walk by it every day. And it stuck with me. It just stuck with me. I never understood the painting. I totally did not know what it was about, but the painting never left my head. And then years later now, and I'm thinking about doing this show, I thought, I'm going to investigate what that painting was. It was called Stampede, and it's the migration of basically the buffalo across the prairie, this just, you know, mad dash of humanity, and it is just a kind of a jumbled mess. And I thought, I like the energy, I like the feeling that this is an extremely physical painting, and so I wanted to bring some of those ideas into making a painting myself. I wanted, like, how do I get so yapped up out without getting drunk for 2 days to make a painting? You know, what is the fire in this artist? Because where do you get this passion? So I, for this experience, decided to really put myself physically into it. And I've never done this before, where I really was physically about controlling the work, setting it all up in one large space. It took me a while to make sure that I had enough panels to work on, that I had enough material, things you don't always think about when you're starting to paint, that do I really have enough paper to get through this? And I had this idea that I was going to do something with the oak tree and the savanna oaks that you used to see on the prairie here, where it would be like a mass of oak trees all sort of tangled together. And it had that feeling of like a Jackson Pollock painting in my mind. So I thought, I want to do something that has sort of this twisting feeling of a Jackson Pollock, but it still has a representational feel to it. And I knew that it had to do with oak trees. And so I started, I'm going to tell you anything you want to hear. So if you have a question while I'm speaking, just sort of raise your hand so I can answer. I started with this center panel. So, and since I knew I was going to do 5, the middle one, I got it going pretty good, and I knew that everything had to work off the center panel. And I really worked on the whole thing at one time. Although this one I got about 50% done, and I hated it, but that's always part of the thing. My work is awful every single minute that I'm going through it, and then about in the last, I don't know, 10% of the work, at about the last 10%, something happens and they get pretty good, you know. So this is the point. Yeah. When your work is really bad and you're doing it, that is the challenge that's before you to press through. You don't stop. So even though I had done this one, I thought, that one's pretty good. I thought, we're going to keep going with this because I know I can get there. And there were times when this thing sort of got away from me because it was so big and I was doing it, but you have to know that you're going to keep pressing forward, that you'll eventually get there. And the thing that I liked working about this is that it's so different than when you're working very small, like on one of the little squares, and it's this inventive little experiment, and you feel like you're almost cooking in the kitchen because you've got, you're mixing things up like you're making a cake. This was like this whole physical thing that I was doing, and so I really made sure I was in tennis shoes every day, and I wanted to really feel like I was moving, so I kept going back and forth because I wanted this very, very loopy feel going through the piece itself. So, okay, any questions? Because then we're eventually, is this a long class? I have to ask that too.
You've got 45 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. I've done other series like this in that, not quite as large as this, but I felt that because I had a museum opportunity, you can show bigger work. And I wanted an experience where I could do something, because I felt that I was to this sort of level in my physical ability to make work. And I also thought, hey, I'm going to get old someday, and I'm not going to be able to do this forever. So for me, because it's hard to stand on concrete and do this all day, and it's, as much as it looks like I'm doing this and just doing little tedious work, it really is not that. It is smearing like this, smearing it around. That's the technical art word, smearing. I did a lot, I blend, oops, I put my hands on the glass. I shouldn't have done that. Oh well, that'll evaporate eventually. I worked the whole thing. Like I had a black chalk in one hand and a white one, and I worked back and forth and back and forth and back and forth over the whole thing at one time, all over it. So it's done with black charcoal. The white is put in and blended with my hands flat. This is all done with a big, fat kind of pastel or charcoal. And then all the little white stuff that you see is really done with a charcoal pencil that I have really finely shaved to a point with an X-Acto knife. I can sit with an X-Acto knife and not look for hours and just shave, 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 shave. And so I did that all day to do all the little white stuff. And I'm not thinking while I'm working. It's a very intuitive process. You're supposed to just keep working, 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 working. Don't think. When I taught college for 1 year, here's my motto: quit thinking about it. Quit thinking. You're in college. Quit thinking. Just do it. Just like get in there and let the flaws be and move forward. Quit trying to make perfect work, make good work. Just get in there and do it. Because when you're in college, you're not supposed to make good work. You're supposed to make work that makes you make better work. You're supposed to keep, moving forward with it.
So were you did you take a picture of these trees, or were you
No.
on location? Or
No.
how did you work big and
I did not work on location for this.
No.
This is totally done in my studio. I had a friend from here in Iowa that had invited me out to see his prairie, who actually was here this morning and reminded me that I had done this. I even forgot. I went out and I saw his prairie, and he really liked one of the Savannah oaks that had been there for about 2 years. And his experience was, I want you to lay underneath, I wish I would have known this at the time, lay underneath the Savannah oak, Ellen, and look up is what he wanted me to do. Well, I did a formal painting for him that was very straightforward of the prairie and the tree. But that wasn't his experience. His experience was looking up into the trees. And he tells me this later. So I'm like, oh, I get it. I get what you're saying. So I kind of wanted the feeling that we were both in the tree, we were in the canopy of the tree, we weren't necessarily on the ground. So what I did is this. I've gone and taken photos of a lot of different oak trees, and I knew the elements that I wanted. So I took the photos of oak trees, put them into my computer, and then I printed them out as black and white, so I could just sort of see black and white lines on paper. I don't like looking at photographs at all. I hate my photography. I don't like holding on to photographs and copying them. I hate doing that. Very tedious. Got to get away from doing that eventually. I did it for years myself. I found, though, that I like more the experience of just getting, I love that flow that you get into when time escapes and you've sort of lost your train of thought, but your muscle memory and your intuition is moving you along. And that is really what makes the painting, is getting lost in the experience of doing. I had no clue what it was going to look like when it was done. It doesn't look anything like the source material I use, which I actually like even more so, because you don't go back and go, oh, look, you just copied that photo. I really like that it moves totally away from that, and that if you saw my source material, you wouldn't say that's how you got to this, but it is how I got to that. I did not sit with sketchbooks so much, but I wrote and read a lot about what I wanted to do.
the negative spaces are so beautiful.
It's important, see, that's the important
Yeah.
part, is how much you keep. And that's
Right.
important to the idea of the Savannah oak itself. And when I was researching, I'm like, Savannah oaks, I'm thinking Africa, because somebody had thrown out the word Savannah oak to me, and I'm like, well, let's look it up. And then what I learned was that a Savannah oak is a stand of oak trees where more than 50% of the light can penetrate the canopy of the trees and still hit the prairie below. And I'm like, oh, that's so fascinating. So, you know, those are the kind of little things you glean from when you're researching that you think you need to make sure happen in the work, that you have lots of light coming through. And then we'll go look at another piece where there's another drawing of a tree that I did before this, where you don't see so much of the negative space. And it was really because of the study about what Savannah oaks were like in Iowa that helped me to totally more understand what I was going to do here.
What made you decide not to use color for these?
Ah, that's good. When you add color, it gets all romantic. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
So it wasn't for me so much that it become narrative about the trees themselves, which then is all about brown and green, you know, or like whatever color combination. I wanted it to look more like a lyrical pattern, you know. I kind of thought, even though I know that these are clearly about these oak trees, for me it's really this ongoing looping lyrical pattern. And I just knew by totally removing color that it almost takes on the feeling of Japanese screen painting, you know, or scroll painting. When they do long Japanese scrolls, they roll out like a story is on a roll, and I like the idea that you could roll the story out, and that often it was just done in like a sumi ink brush, and that they told so much with just sumi ink. So it was an easy time to decide that was going to be in black and white. And then there were other things that I do in color where you would never do it. It would never make sense to paint prairie fires in black and white because you'd never get it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it wouldn't, and you would not paint necessarily the four seasons in black and white because it doesn't describe what the four seasons are. So that's
There's a different color palette.
totally different color palette. And yet I'm going to point out in here, there are a couple of paintings, they're not in this part of the gallery, but there are two that I'm going to point out to you that look like black and white paintings, but they're not actually black and white. They're sort of an off-white taupe cream kind of color is the white, and the black is actually kind of a blue-gray purple. And I wanted it to look like vintage photography that had aged, you know, and that black and white photography sort of changes over time. So when we go by those paintings, one called Black Sunday and the other one is Locust, I'm going to kind of point those out so you can see where I really, I never think of myself as a colorist, but I really obviously spent some time thinking about what color black, because there are many colors of black, and I wanted to use the color. The color was important in telling what the piece is about. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah, so, okay. Let's go talk, well, maybe we'll take a little walk over and we'll go over to it. I always, before I start drawing, I have my paper, which is a sanded pastel paper. It's a very soft grit, 800 grit. I used to work on ArtIS cover paper, you know, like in art school when you start. But a friend of mine who was a pastel artist brought me this beautiful paper, and I started referring to it as magic paper, because anybody who ever used it after me was like, oh God, I'm such a good artist. I'm like, I know, it's the paper, right? You know? So it's part of the thing is the paper itself. The paper is mounted on top of gator board in big sheets, and then I cut them up so that when I'm ready to go out and paint, it's all ready to go. It's not like every time you have to work, you have to get out and start it again. It's more like, here's the supplies. Sometimes I even set up the night ahead of time. I'll like put the paper out and I'll put my supplies, and here's the stereo. So I know in the morning when I drop off my child at school, I go back home and I'm ready to start to work. There isn't like a half an hour of messing around. You know, for me, warm up is work. You know, I start warming up on small paintings just to, you know, and often, I've said this before, I take off my glasses so I can't see quite so well, and then I don't think so much about the good and the bad, you know, and I'm freer about my work. And sometimes, I even had a faculty member years ago who said, well, you're really good at drawing, why don't you try to draw with the other hand? And actually that turned out to be sort of good, because I found that I drew in a different way with my right hand. I was free about thinking. I didn't try to draw so hard. Do you know what I mean? It was just a different kind of experience. So sometimes I let myself do that every now and then just to sort of loosen up, because I'm kind of uptight sometimes. So anyway, this is the beginning. They always start this size for small sketches for me. I consider these very formal finished sketches, and I tend to finish everything. I do not have stacks and stacks of art in my garage. I finish every painting I make. I really do, because it takes so much time. Even by the time you're 8 hours into it, you're like, you better finish it, right? You know, you're 8 hours in, and this is my job, so I don't like wasting 8 hours of studio time. And I find that every painting that is bad is just only a moment away from being really, really good. You know, and the worst paintings are often the ones that turn out to be quite the best, the most imaginative. So that's probably something I wouldn't repeat in front of people if I finish every single painting, but I really, really do. I just make I do not like throwing stuff away. I like a totally clean studio. I don't want any mess or garbage out from 3 weeks ago. That's, you know, I just finish them, I put them in the frame, and then we move on to the next thing.
We talk a lot about understanding and, well, increasing our self-awareness and understanding our own working methods and what creates our best place of work,
Yes.
you know, and so like that varies from person to person. So it's great to hear you talk about.
My methods are, it took me a long
Routine
time.
and
Routine for me. I tend to stand, and I don't even really keep a formal studio. Most people are like, so where is your studio? They want to come in and have this really great experience, but often it's literally on the island in my kitchen, or I work on my kitchen island a lot, because I like the height, and I'm familiar with the room, and the light is just right, and you turn on the stair, and there's nothing wrong with your kitchen. You know, I pretty much made this whole show in my kitchen. It's outrageous, really. People are like, really, in your kitchen? Yes, I did. And my garage. And I emptied, to do this show, I emptied my garage of everything but the car that I pulled back in the night. And I mean everything, the bicycle, the trash can, every speck. Nothing could be in there but plain white. And I found that I tend to lose focus. I tend to, you know, if there are little cool things in the room, little things taped on the wall, I love all that, but then I get lost in that, and I have to be totally like this all the time when I work. Otherwise, I just sort of float around the room and I don't really accomplish anything. So I'm like, I am not one of those kind of artists who keeps everything they've been working on up in the room. For me, it's done, it's over, it's gone. And if I keep my sketches are pretty nice. They're on tracing paper, and that too is its own little process. I like them, keep them in a nice box so you can get them out and look at. And I'm just not that messy. As much as I like to work messy, I don't like a messy studio. So this group over here, actually, I like this group so much just because I had no clue when I started it, I really wanted to make a painting. One painting doesn't describe a sunrise, but as in a collective group, and certainly because I see these as small sketches, and then when I find something really successful in them, then often I take it and I blow them up big. I particularly like this one. It's interesting that she chose to put this one on the invitation because she didn't know it was my favorite. So that's brilliant curating, when they just like pick what you love. And again, I said I listen to a lot of music. So this one's called Pink Floyd, and a lot of you can almost tell what's on my Pandora list by looking at the titles sometimes of paintings. There's a lot of, you know, music titles from U2, Tom Petty figured in, you know, it was just again, because that's my routine. That's my routine to put on music, and as long as I've got that going on, I can sort of lose myself, you know, in whatever it is. And this group of paintings just sort of grew out of listening to a Pink Floyd song one morning and watching the sunrise. That's pretty good inspiration, isn't it? Yeah, and I like these because I've never done anything quite like this, and I used to think of these small works as sort of inconsequential. They didn't seem like they were very important on their own, but when I started working them on in putting them into groups, and they took on sort of a gravitas that made them seem more cohesive and important.
Well, and the box or the frames
The
sort
box.
of are like look like shadow boxes in
Yes.
some way, and
Yeah.
so they have, it almost has a scientific quality
Oh,
to it.
that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Versus
Yeah.
like some sort of romantic gold lip frame.
Right,
You know
right.
What I mean?
Well, and obviously I have a thing
Like a
about
time
this
lapse.
shape. Yeah, I like the feeling often that you almost are looking at still photography in a time lapse kind of thing, and that was definitely true on the big tornado. Well, we haven't looked at the big tornadoes yet. Those are like a time lapse thing, but this too is like time lapse in color. And you can't paint a sunset without using really luscious. It is about the color, of course. It's the color of time.
in one of the earlier classes, somebody had asked me about, well, do you take photos of the sunrise? And I said, no, absolutely not. Because when you get those photos, they look not like you had that experience. You had a memory at the moment, and you felt something at the moment that is not in that picture. So for me, I got pretty good over the years of really memorizing exactly, and I was mesmerized, by exactly what I would see. And I go out pretty much every day and yell at my family, come see the sunset, come see the sunset. And then we all stand there and look at the colors. And I think I can often take like a little mental picture where I look and then I close my eyes and think, did it imprint itself so thoroughly on my brain that I will be able to bring this back? And that is really one of the source materials I would say I use the most is my memory. And going back and remembering, how did I feel? These were a joyous experience to make these because the sun is coming up. You're listening to Pink Floyd, you know. I wanted it to feel very up the way I was feeling. So you have to like try to imbibe those sort of emotions while you're working. So whatever it takes you to get to that attitude. You know, and sometimes I listen to some tough music, some really hard, you know, I got a thing for Ozzy Osbourne too, you know, so I mean, speed metal is fine for me, you know, I'm willing to try different stuff, you know, to see how it affects how I feel about when I'm working. So, let's move into this direction. This piece is called Terra. It's really about, you know when you're driving down a country road, and I'm thinking, you know, as a landscape painter, there's the tradition of the sky, and then the stage, which is the land. And I'd always looked at landscape that way. And then I started driving the country roads. The land is above you, and you're on the road lower, and you can see into the cutaway, into the land itself. And it really started me thinking about how the earth nurtures us, and we nurture the earth. If you take care of the earth will take care of you. And it's a symbiotic relationship that farmers have with the land. And since so much of my work is about agriculture and the look of the changing landscape, I really felt I needed to do something about dirt, which is not a subject you go, I'm going to make a painting about dirt, you know, and I'm going to spend a month on it and get excited. Yet, I also thought, you know, it's about the dirt and the grasses and the grasses that hold the prairie down. Because if we don't have all these grasses, the earth just blows away like the Dust Bowl, and you know, and then it's over. So a dirt painting to me was like, how can you make the most beautiful painting about dirt? That I never thought of, that you wrote down, because I saw you writing everything. I'm like, I don't know if she's writing something good down.